The evening sky burned red over Zululand as the sun dipped behind the rolling hills. The wind carried the scent of smoke from distant fires, the heartbeat of a kingdom preparing for war. Inside the great royal kraal of Ulundi, warriors gathered in a circle, their dark eyes reflecting the flickering flames. The war drums pounded like thunder, echoing through the valley, a call to arms for every Zulu son who could wield a spear. Sibanja Sini, a proud warrior in his early 30s, stood tall among his people, his face set like stone. He had seen war before, had felt the sharp sting of loss, but this was different. This was not a battle for cattle or land. This was a battle for survival. Beside him, his childhood friend Thabani, a fierce warrior with a deep scar running across his cheek, leaned in and whispered, "Do you feel it, brother? The way the air is heavy. Like the spirits are watching?" Sibanjasini nodded but said nothing. He felt it too. A deep, unsettling weight pressed upon his chest as if the ancestors themselves were warning them of the storm to come. The warriors were waiting for the words of their great king, Setshweo Kompand, a man whose very presence commanded loyalty. Clad in leopard skins, his eyes sharp as a hawk, Setshweo stepped forward, raising his assegai. Silence fell instantly. "The British have crossed into our land," he said, his voice steady, powerful. "They come with their guns, their greed, their lies. They wish to make us slaves in our own kingdom. But we are Ama Zulu. We bow to no man." A deafening roar erupted from the warriors, their shields striking the earth in unison. The ground trembled beneath their feet. King Setshweo's gaze swept over them, his voice lowering but carrying even more weight. "I will not order you to fight. I will not force you to bleed for this land. But I ask you, as warriors, as sons of our fathers, will you stand and defend Zululand?" Sibanjasini raised his spear high. "To the death, my king! To the death!" The warriors echoed. But as the cheers rang through the night, deep in the shadows, a man slipped away unseen. Bika, a warrior with a heart poisoned by greed, moved swiftly through the darkness. He had already made his decision. Later that night, Sibanjasini walked alone to the edge of the river. The moon cast its silver glow on the water, turning it into a shimmering path stretching into the unknown. He bent down, cupping the cool water in his hands, and splashed it over his face. He was not afraid to die. He had made peace with death long ago. But he feared something greater, the loss of his people, the destruction of their way of life. A soft rustle behind him made him turn. It was Nandi, his beloved, her eyes filled with unspoken words. She had come, despite knowing she shouldn't. "You should not be here," he murmured. "I could not sleep," she admitted. Tomorrow, you leave." Sibanjasini sighed, pulling her close. She rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, as if trying to memorize the sound. "You must return to me," she whispered. "I will," he promised. But they both knew it was a promise he could not truly keep. Nandi pulled away slightly, her fingers tracing the scars on his arms. "When you fight, think of home. Think of me. Let it give you strength." He cupped her face, memorizing every detail, the curve of her lips, the warmth in her eyes. "If I fall, do not cry for me. Cry for our land, for our people. Promise me, Nandi, that you will live." A single tear slipped down her cheek, but she nodded. "And if you live, promise me you will come back." "I promise." They stood there, wrapped in each other's warmth, knowing the night was slipping away too quickly. Meanwhile, on the far side of the valley, Bika rode through the darkness, heading straight for the British camp. Bika approached the British outpost cautiously, his heart hammering in his chest. He had always admired the power of the British, their guns, their uniforms, their command over the land. Now, he would stand among them. A red-coated soldier stopped him at the entrance. "Halt! Who goes there?" "I bring news," Bika said quickly. "News of the Zulu army." Minutes later, he stood before Colonel Edward Harrington, the British officer leading the campaign. A man of rigid posture and piercing blue eyes, Harrington studied Bika with the cold calculation of a hunter assessing his prey. "You have something of value, I presume?" Harrington asked, swirling a glass of brandy in his hand. Bika took a deep breath. "The Zulu warriors are planning to attack at sunrise. They will come in large numbers, but they will not expect you to be ready." Harrington raised an eyebrow. "And why should I trust a Zulu?" "Because I am not like them," Bika said firmly. "I know the British will win this war. I wish to be on the side of the victors." Harrington smirked, leaning forward. "And what is it that you want in return?" "Gold. Land. A place among you." The British officer chuckled. "You betray your own people for a handful of coins?" Bika did not flinch. "I do what I must to survive." Harrington took a sip of his drink, then nodded. "Very well, then. Let us prepare for the Zulus." As Bika left the camp, a strange unease settled in his stomach. He had done what he had to do, hadn't he? At sunrise, the Zulu warriors assembled, their spears glinting in the golden light. Sibanjasini tightened his grip on his shield, breathing deeply. Today, the world would remember the strength of the Zulu. Chief Mandla raised his hand. "Sibanjasini, you will lead the left horn. Thabani, you will take the right. We strike with the force of the buffalo." Sibanjasini nodded, his muscles coiled like a panther ready to pounce. But something felt wrong. The land was too quiet. The air too still. And then, boom! A cannon blast shattered the silence, ripping through the front lines of Zulu warriors. The British were ready. They had been waiting. Sibanjasini's stomach dropped. "It's a trap." From the hills, British soldiers emerged in formation, their rifles raised. The Zulu warriors, caught in open ground, had no cover. But fear had no place here. "For the king!" Sibanjasini roared, charging forward. The warriors followed, their voices rising in an earth-shaking war cry. Bullets tore through the air. Warriors fell, but the Zulu pressed on, closing the distance. The British reloaded, but the Zulu were already upon them, spears flashing, shields smashing into red-coated bodies. Sibanjasini spotted a familiar face in the chaos, Bika, standing among the British, laughing. Rage exploded within him. He gripped his spear and hurled it with deadly precision. It struck Bika's chest, silencing his treachery forever. But the battle was not over. Smoke and blood filled the air. The Zulu warriors fought with the spirit of their ancestors, but the British guns were relentless. The tide was turning. Sibanjasini's heart pounded. This was not just a battle, it was the fight for Zululand's soul. And he would not go down without a fight. The battlefield was chaos. Smoke and dust swirled in the air as the echoes of gunfire and the clash of steel filled the valley. The Zulu warriors had broken through the British lines, their spears cutting down soldiers one by one. Sibanjasini fought like a man possessed, his assegai piercing through a redcoat's chest before he spun, his shield deflecting a musket shot. Blood sprayed across his face, but he did not slow. "Thabani!" he called out, searching for his brother-in-arms. Thabani emerged from the dust, his body smeared with dirt and blood, panting heavily. "They fight like wounded lions," he growled. "But they are still only men." The British were falling back, struggling to reload their weapons as the Zulu forces pressed forward. The warriors fought with precision, surrounding the enemy using their famous horns of the buffalo formation. Sibanjasini felt hope rising in his chest. We can win this. But then, boom! The sound of a cannon split the air. A shell exploded behind them, sending warriors flying in all directions. The British had brought their artillery forward. Another blast sent shockwaves through the battlefield. Sibongiseni shielded his face as the earth trembled beneath him. When the dust settled, he saw the unthinkable, scores of his brothers lying lifeless, their bodies torn apart by the unforgiving cannons. And then, from the ridge, a new force of British soldiers appeared, reinforcements. Hundreds of them. Sibongiseni's heart clenched. This was the betrayal of Bika. This was the price of treachery. For the first time that day, doubt crept into his mind. Thabani grabbed Sibongiseni's arm. We cannot hold this ground. We must retreat and regroup. But retreat meant surrendering Isandlwana. It meant letting the British march deeper into Zululand. Sibongiseni turned to his warriors, reading their faces. They were wounded, tired, but their eyes still burned with fire. No, he said firmly. We fight until the last man. A warrior nearby pounded his spear against his shield. For the king. For Zululand. Another shouted. For our ancestors. The warriors raised their voices in a final, deafening war cry, shaking the very air around them. And then they charged. Sibongiseni ran like the wind, his legs burning, his heart pounding against his ribs. He leapt over the fallen, his spear slicing through enemy after enemy. He did not stop. Did not hesitate. A British soldier lunged at him with a bayonet. Sibongiseni sidestepped, grabbing the man's musket and driving his assegai deep into his chest. He turned, only to see Thabani fall to his knees, blood pouring from a wound in his side. No! Sibongiseni rushed to his friend, catching him before he hit the ground. Thabani's eyes fluttered open, a weak smile on his lips. Do not weep for me, brother, he whispered. We knew this day would come. Sibongiseni's throat tightened. You cannot leave me. Not like this. Thabani gripped his arm, his strength fading. Live. So you can tell our story. And then, he was gone. Rage, grief, and desperation fused together in Sibongiseni's chest. He rose to his feet, gripping his spear tighter than ever. He would fight until his body could fight no more. But then he heard it, the retreat call. The surviving warriors, realizing they were outnumbered and outgunned, had no choice. They began falling back, disappearing into the hills, leaving behind the bodies of their fallen brothers. Sibongiseni hesitated, his breath ragged. He looked around, the battlefield was lost. His king needed him alive. His people needed him alive. With one last glance at Thabani's lifeless form, he turned and ran into the shadows of the hills. The loss at Isandlwana was both a victory and a curse. The Zulu had dealt the British a crushing blow, wiping out an entire regiment, but the empire was not so easily broken. Furious and humiliated, the British regrouped, bringing in thousands of reinforcements. By the time they reached Ulundi, the Zulu capital, they came not as soldiers, but as conquerors. They burned the great kraal to the ground, scattering the people and capturing King Setshwayo. Sibongiseni stood on a distant hill, watching the flames consume his home. His heart ached, but he did not weep. The British had won the war. But they had not won his spirit. Years later, Sibongiseni sat by a fire, telling his story to the next generation of warriors. The children listened with wide eyes, their young hands gripping wooden spears as they imagined the great battle. One boy, bold and bright-eyed, asked, "Did we lose, Baba?" Sibongiseni smiled, shaking his head. "No, son. The British took our land, but they could never take our soul." He pointed to the sky, where the stars shone brightly, unbroken by time. As long as the ancestors watch over us, as long as we remember who we are never truly defeated. The wind carried his words into the night, whispering them through the valleys of Zululand. And so, the legend of the Zulu warriors lived on, etched in the earth, sung in the rivers, and passed down from father to son, from mother to daughter. For the Zulu were not just warriors. They were history. They were eternal. The Zulu ultimately lost the war against the British. The Anglo-Zulu War, 1879, started with a major Zulu victory at the Battle of Isandlwana, where they overwhelmed and nearly destroyed a British column. However, this victory was short-lived. The British, shocked by the defeat, quickly regrouped and launched a stronger, more organized counterattack. After the defeat of the Zulu at Rorke's Drift, a British defensive victory, and a series of battles, the war ended with the Battle of Ulundi, July 1879, where the British used superior firepower, including Gatling guns and artillery, to crush the Zulu army. King Cetshwayo was captured, and the Zulu kingdom was divided, weakening their resistance. Even though the Zulu fought bravely, British military technology and tactics eventually overpowered them, leading to the fall of the Zulu kingdom. However, the war cemented the Zulu people's legendary reputation for courage and military strategy. Subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell to receive a free downloadable guide to African folklore, featuring exclusive stories and insights not shared anywhere else. Thanks for watching.